Good evening, America. As you watch this video, people are running. Cars are gridlocked on the highways of Beirut, the capital city of Lebanon, one of the oldest cities on earth. Families are loading children into cars. Motorcycles and trucks and any vehicle that moves are all pushing north in a panicked wave. This is not a drill. This is not old footage. This is happening right now, June 2, 2026. Israel issued an evacuation order for Beirut's Dahiyeh district this morning. Dahiyeh is not a military base. It is a dense residential neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of people, and it is being emptied by a military order right now while the United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting on Lebanon, while Iran's foreign minister went on television and said the Iran-US ceasefire is unequivocally over if Israeli attacks on Lebanon continue, and while the peace deal that was supposed to end this entire war is now, according to Iranian state media, very likely to collapse entirely if these strikes do not stop. Tonight, this story is not about diplomats and memorandums anymore. Tonight, this story is about people running from a capital city. And every American needs to understand exactly why that is happening, what it means for the Iran deal, and what the United States of America's role is in what is unfolding on the streets of Beirut right now. Let us start with exactly what happened today, because the timeline of the last 18 hours is one of the most dramatic sequences of events in this entire war. Sunday, June 1, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a direct order to his military to strike targets in Dahiyeh, Beirut's southern suburbs. Dahiyeh is Hezbollah's urban stronghold inside the Lebanese capital. It is also home to hundreds of thousands of ordinary Lebanese civilians, including families of all backgrounds and beliefs who happen to live in the same neighborhoods where Hezbollah has its headquarters, its offices, and its infrastructure. Netanyahu's order was announced publicly. The Israeli Prime Minister's office posted the statement directly. Following Hezbollah's repeated and ongoing violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon and its attacks against Israeli civilians and cities, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have instructed the IDF to strike terror targets in the Dahiyeh quarter of Beirut. Within minutes of that announcement, the highways out of Dahiyeh were gridlocked. Videos posted on social media showed children being carried by parents running toward highways. Cars that normally move through Beirut's chaotic traffic were bumper to bumper for miles, barely inching forward. People were fleeing Beirut's southern suburbs in scenes that brought back memories of the worst days of the 2006 Lebanon War and the even more devastating scenes from early March when this current conflict began. More than 1 million people have already been displaced across Lebanon since March 2. Today, that number grew. And here is the moment that changed everything. Not just for Lebanon, not just for this war, but for the Iran deal that the whole world has been waiting to see signed. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi wrote on social media today in direct response to Israel's Beirut order. He said, and I want every American to hear these words carefully, the ceasefire in place between Iran and the United States since April is unequivocally a ceasefire on all fronts, including in Lebanon. He said violation on one front is a violation of the ceasefire on all fronts. And then he said the words that may end this entire peace process. The United States and Israel are responsible for the consequences of any violation. That statement is Iran's formal warning to the United States. Tehran is telling Washington that it holds America responsible for what Israel is doing in Beirut tonight. America and Israel launched this war together on February 28. America and Israel are allies. And Iran is saying that an Israeli strike on Beirut is the same, in Tehran's view, as an American violation of the ceasefire. And Iranian state television went even further. It reported that the ceasefire agreed between Iran and the United States was very likely to end if Israeli attacks persisted in Lebanon. Think about what that means for the timeline. Last week, a deal was described as largely negotiated. Trump walked into the Situation Room and walked out without signing. Then Israel raised its flag at Beaufort Castle and crossed the Litani River. Then Israel issued evacuation orders for the entire south of Lebanon. And now today, Israel ordered the evacuation of a major residential district of Beirut, the Lebanese capital, and Iran's foreign minister responded by saying the ceasefire itself is at risk. The Iran deal did not just stall this week. It may have just been killed, not by diplomats arguing over a word or a sentence, but by Israeli bombs falling on Beirut while peace negotiations were supposed to be in their final phase. Let us now go back one day to understand the full sequence of events that led to today's evacuation order, because the Beaufort Castle story from yesterday has its own new and devastating developments that compound everything happening in Beirut. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting today, called by France, to discuss Israel's capture of Beaufort Castle and its expanding ground offensive in southern Lebanon. The meeting was the highest-level international response to the Lebanon escalation since this conflict began. The UN's own representative told the Security Council that Israel has effectively designated the entirety of southern Lebanon as a combat zone. She said Israeli forces have circulated images of the Israeli flag flying over Beaufort Castle, evoking memories of Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon from 1982 until 2000. She reported that the surge in hostilities has exacted a devastating human toll, with 3,412 people killed and more than 10,000 wounded in Lebanon since March 2. 3,412 dead in Lebanon, 10,000 wounded, more than 1 million displaced. Those are not statistics that can be digested quickly. They represent a humanitarian catastrophe of extraordinary scale in a small country that was already one of the most economically devastated nations in the world before this war began. France's President Emmanuel Macron spoke directly at the Security Council meeting, saying nothing justifies the major escalation underway in South Lebanon and calling for an immediate end to the fighting. France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot had already stated publicly that nothing can justify the continuation of Israeli military operations in Lebanon and its ever deeper occupation of Lebanese territory. Multiple nations addressed the Security Council and called for a lasting ceasefire. But here's the brutal reality about today's UN Security Council meeting that every American who believes in international institutions needs to understand. Russia, which holds a permanent veto on the Security Council, has no incentive to support any resolution that serves American interests in this crisis. China, which also holds a permanent veto, has its own strategic reasons to allow this conflict to continue draining American diplomatic and military resources. Any binding Security Council resolution on Lebanon can be vetoed by either of them. Words from the Security Council today will not stop Israeli bombs from falling on Beirut tonight. Now let us talk about what Netanyahu's specific justification for the Beirut order was, because it reveals the impossible logical trap that this war has built for everyone involved. Netanyahu said Israel was responding to Hezbollah's repeated and ongoing violations of the April ceasefire. Israel has consistently maintained throughout this conflict that Hezbollah has violated the ceasefire hundreds of times since it took effect. Israel has been striking Hezbollah targets continuously since April, also claiming it is responding to ceasefire violations. Hezbollah has been launching rockets into northern Israel continuously, also claiming it is responding to Israeli ceasefire violations. Both sides are simultaneously claiming to be responding to the other's ceasefire violations. And the body count in Lebanon has crossed 3,400 people killed with no end in sight. What has changed this week is the scale and the symbolism. Raising the Israeli flag over Beaufort Castle is not a routine tactical operation. It is a statement. Crossing the Litani River is not a proportionate response to a rocket barrage. It is a strategic decision to expand the occupation zone in Lebanon far beyond anything that was in place before this conflict began. And issuing an evacuation order for Dahieh in Beirut is not a targeted counterterrorism operation. It is the beginning of a campaign to strike the Lebanese capital itself in a neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of civilians for the first time since this phase of the conflict began in March. Israel has killed 8,000 Hezbollah militants, according to its own count, since October 7, 2023. It has seized hundreds of square kilometers of Lebanese territory. It has killed 3,400 Lebanese people, the vast majority of whom were not Hezbollah fighters. And Netanyahu has vowed to push even deeper into Lebanon. The Israeli defense minister said at a military ceremony that whoever harms Israeli civilians will lose their territory from which they operate. He is describing a doctrine of permanent territorial seizure as punishment. He is saying that the lesson of this war for Lebanon, for Hezbollah, and for any other group that threatens Israel is that attacks on Israel will result in the permanent loss of the territory from which those attacks are launched. That doctrine, if it is actually implemented, means Israel intends to stay in southern Lebanon. It means the security zone that Israel withdrew from in 2000 after 18 years of occupation is being recreated. And it means the Lebanon ceasefire that Iran has made a non-negotiable condition for signing any peace deal with the United States is not just being violated. It is being rendered permanently impossible. Here is the most important strategic question of tonight, and it is one that the American media is not asking loudly enough. Does the United States have any ability to stop Israel from doing what it is doing in Lebanon? And if it does, is it willing to use that ability? The United States supplies Israel with weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Every Security Council resolution that would have condemned Israel's actions in Lebanon, Gaza, and now in this conflict has been vetoed or blocked by the United States. America's financial support for Israel is extensive, deep, and institutionalized across decades of American foreign policy and congressional appropriations. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have a close personal relationship, and the administration has repeatedly described Israel as America's closest ally in the Middle East. But here is what is also true. The Iran deal, the one that Trump entered the Situation Room to sign and walked out without signing, specifically requires a Lebanon ceasefire framework as a condition for Iran to accept. Iran's foreign minister said today that the ceasefire is over if Lebanon strikes continue. Iranian state television said the deal is very likely to collapse if these strikes persist. America cannot simultaneously be Israel's unconditional military and diplomatic patron, and also broker a peace deal with Iran that requires restraining Israel in Lebanon. These two commitments are directly in conflict with each other. And tonight, in the streets of Beirut, we are watching that conflict play out in real time. The gas prices that American families have been paying for the past 3 months are a direct consequence of the Strait of Hormuz disruption. The Iran deal was supposed to end that disruption and bring prices down. America's own AAA data showed the national average for gas had already fallen 14 cents from near 4-year highs of $4.56 per gallon as markets reacted to deal optimism last week. But gasoline is still 49% more expensive than before the war started, when the national average was $2.98. If the Iran deal collapses because of Israeli strikes on Beirut, those prices will go back up. The economic relief that American families were beginning to anticipate will evaporate, and Americans will be paying the price of Israeli military decisions made in Beirut, at the gas pump, and the grocery store from here to the horizon. The humanitarian numbers from this conflict now demand their own explicit accounting, because they are not abstractions. The Lebanese Health Ministry has confirmed that 3,412 people have been killed in Lebanon since March 2, more than 10,000 wounded. More than 1 million displaced. 116 medical workers killed. The UN said Israel has effectively designated the entirety of southern Lebanon as a combat zone. The city of Tyre, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, has been so severely struck that its civil defense teams have been ordered to evacuate to Sidon. A woman named Zainab Faki told reporters from a shelter that it is impossible for us to return to our home because the city is in great destruction. And now, tonight, the southern suburbs of Beirut, home to hundreds of thousands of people, are being emptied by Israeli military orders as the Lebanese capital itself enters the war in a new and more devastating phase. Here is the full picture as you watch this video on June 2, 2026. Beirut's Dahia is being evacuated tonight. Iran's foreign minister says the Iran-US ceasefire is at risk because of Lebanese strikes. Iranian state TV says the deal is very likely to collapse. The UN Security Council met in emergency session and issued no binding resolution. Netanyahu has vowed to push deeper into Lebanon. Israel has crossed the Litani River. Israel has raised its flag at Beaufort Castle. 3,412 Lebanese are dead, 10,000 wounded, 1 million displaced. The Iran peace deal is unsigned. Trump has not decided. Gas is still 49% more expensive than before the war. And tonight, children are running through gridlocked Beirut traffic while the world watches and argues. America, I want to ask you something tonight that is harder than anything I've asked before on this channel. Iran's foreign minister said today that the ceasefire is over if Israeli attacks on Lebanon continue, and that America and Israel are both responsible for what happens next. The Iran deal that would lower your gas prices, end a war that has already lasted 95 days, and begin nuclear negotiations is now at risk because of what Israel is doing in Beirut tonight. Here's my question for you. Should the United States tell Israel to stop bombing Beirut and pull back from Lebanon right now in order to save the Iran deal and lower your gas prices? Or should America stand fully behind Israel no matter what, even if it means the Iran deal dies, the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, and you keep paying $4.50 for a gallon of gas for the rest of the year? Drop your answer in the comments right now. This is the most important question this war has produced. And the answer matters because the people making this decision in Washington are watching what Americans think. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is going to break again before sunrise, and we will be here